Welcome to Satsunami. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Satsunami. I'm Satsunami and levelling up with me this week is my very good friend Adam. Hello Adam, welcome back.
Hello. Good to be back.
Always good to have a familiar co-host here.
No matter the quality, it's the familiarity that matters.
You know we keep a high standard in this show. You know it.
Yeah, I doubt it because I'm sure I wouldn't be on here if that was true.
We'll renegotiate after the episode. Don't worry. After we go offline.
Nobody said there'd be quality here. I was lied to.
So, speaking of segues that totally don't relate to that point, yeah, today, as you can see by the title, today we are going to be talking about quite an interesting topic, I have to say, because initially I was kind of thinking that this would just be a kind of standard list. You know, we would just list off our top video game levels and that would be it. We would just, set it aside and that would be fine. But there actually is a lot more to it, isn't there?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's actually a really deep and actually interesting topic. So I'm looking forward to delving into it.
But before we dive into, giving our opinions, our clear objective opinions, not subjective at all, I'm going to pose a question to you, Adam. So first of all, what would you say defines a level?
Yeah, this was actually maybe if anything the trickiest question of all the ones that you posed, and I wasn't really sure how to answer it. But I came across this definition, and it's a very boring and dry definition. So apologies in advance, but I think it's actually a really good one. So the way I would define like a video game level is the total space available to the player during the course of completing an objective. Now, I say that's highly dry and quite dull, but I think it's actually a very good summation of if you want to just go like broad, generic, what is a video game level? I think level is one of these catch-all terms because, not every video game has quote-unquote levels. I know a lot of games have level 1, level 2, but you see lots of other terms which basically mean the same thing. Some games have acts, chapters, you get episodes, maps, missions, stages. So there's like a variety of terms, but I think they all revolve around that definition, the above definition that I gave there.
It's definitely a different coat of paint though, isn't it? Where as you said, it's like if you go into Call of Duty, it's missions. If you go into like Life is Strange, for example, it's in chapters. It's
Sonics and stages, isn't it?
Sonics and stages, yeah. And Mario's like in worlds, is it not?
Yeah, the original Doom had its maps,
Even though, this is the thing, because I honestly felt quite old when I was kind of reading about this, because I was I was one stage away from stepping out into my garden and yelling at the kids to get away from my lawn, as it were. But, when we were growing up, platformers were, at least in the 90s, they were all the rage, and you know how it evolved from platformers to more edgy, FPS games, and the whole gaming scene has changed. It's kind of inevitable that it's going to change because it's such a big industry. But would you say the concept of levels changed with it?
I think certainly in terms of scope and scale, the concept of a level definitely changed. Just with the growth in basically console and computer memory. Once game developers could create bigger worlds, and bigger games, the idea of a level changed. It didn't have to be the kind of self-contained, quite linear experience that was more the norm in your kind of 80s and 90s, even into your kind of early 2000s. I still think that in terms of what actually, that definition of a level, I still, for me personally, I still think it holds as basically the same. I just think it's just been a big expansion in scale, really, and kind of scope.
It's almost as if it's a necessity, isn't it?
Yeah.
That if a video game is going to change, because when I said I felt old talking about that kind of thing, it's just, I'm laughing because I'm thinking, when you used to see those, whether it's an article in the news or, it's someone trying to understand gaming from an outsider perspective. And, it's you always see the stereotypical, oh look, I leveled up, game on, game over, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's what I always remember when you used to watch those TV shows when you were younger, and it was clear that the writers, it would be a show for kids, but they didn't have an idea of like what video games were.
Yeah.
Like I always remember, I think it was the show like this is going to sound like a weird tangent, but I think it was that show My Parents Are Aliens or something like that, or My Something Are Aliens. Like it was just this sitcom, as the title implies, these kids get adopted by aliens, blah, blah, blah. And I always remember there was this one episode that I got really riled up about because there was this kid, like, playing a Game Boy, and there was all these kind of stock sound effects of, the pew-pew and things like that going on. That boy did not have a cartridge in that Game Boy. And
classic error.
And they had like they emphasised like, stop that game, you've got dinner, and it's like, oh, I'm just finishing this level, and you're like, that's it's wrong.
It's not even got batteries in it, probably.
It probably didn't. They probably just like gave them a Nokia and said, yeah, pretend this is a Game Boy. It's like, go on, pleb.
It's called acting, son.
Exactly. You're in the real world now, son. It's kind of like, what is this show? Just anyway, that is aside. But that's the thing, though, that it's that kind of understanding of like video games as a whole, which again is a whole different topic. But yeah, the idea of like splitting games up into levels, because that's the way it used to be. It's like you had these different sections of a video game, and it was just like, oh, you would be stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, building up to the boss at the end of it. And nowadays it seems a lot more like the lines for what constitutes as a level seems a lot more blurred, as you said, like with missions or like stages, worlds, whatever you want to call it. It's just it evolves with the game, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, as well, like if you think about like older games, one of the things that I always think about on an older level is that you used to be able to, like, you'd go into the main menu and you could go to like a level select screen, and you could go jump into like an old level. And you can still do that with some games. But if you're looking at like a lot of open world games now, you don't really, unless you like save the game at a very particular point, and hold on to that kind of save point, you don't really have the option to jump back into, like, you couldn't like jump back into a mission that you liked in The Witcher 3, I don't think. There's no like option to select a mission. They've become more kind of organic and ingrained sort of like into the game itself and into the world. And even stuff like Half-Life 2 and things. Half-Life 2 is technically a completely continuous experience. Like they have like little loading screens, and you do get like the kind of new episode, new chapter names come up each time, but it is like a completely continuous thing. There's no like cutscene or any kind of like classic end of level thing. You proceed to another area. The game will do a bit of loading, and then it's like, oh, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called chapters in Half-Life. It was like chapter 4. Into that, but it's a more organic experience of just proceeding through.
Is it chapters for Half-Life?
I think it's. I might be wrong in saying that. It might be. I think it's chapters, but I'm willing to be corrected because I might be wrong on that. It's not levels anyway. I know it's not called level.
These damn kids and their levels and things. So yeah, that kind of brings us on to like, I suppose before we get into our like personal favourites, that brings us on to our first kind of really question. Actually, sorry, before I go on about that, just pointing out something you were saying there, because I just remembered there. I was like, what was I going to say? I was like, I don't know. But just when you said about going back to levels, like I remember playing through, I think it was GTA 5, and I think you can play through levels again. Like there's a mission. There's definitely a mission select, I'm sure. I could be wrong. Maybe it's that, or maybe it's
because they have ratings, don't they? So you like replay missions to get better. No, you are correct.
It's just so weird doing that in an open world game.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, like, I would have no... Like, if I was playing a Sonic game, for example, I would have no issue with just, like, going back and playing it again, trying to, Oh, God, I was about to say get the high score, and even then I felt old, because I'm like...
You want to put those three letters onto the, the top of the screen.
Those
sat right on the top.
Yeah. Just etch my name into history. One day that'll happen.
One of these days.
It's a life goal. But with sandbox games and kind of open world games, it's not really the same, is it?
No, it's a different sort of experience in a way. I guess that's the term.
So before we get into talking about our favourite levels, and this is probably going to be quite a broad question, but what would you say makes a level good or bad in your opinion?
Okay, right. So I'll go with what makes a level good as first. So I donned my researcher cap here, and I dug into the archives to try and see if I could elucidate the key principles. So I came up with three key principles that I think make a good level. So this is Adam's three key principles to level design from somebody who has no qualifications or any sort of business talking about this. But here we go. So the three principles that I came up with that I thought are most important were emotion, innovation, and then design. So with the heading of emotion, I truly believe that a good level elicits like an emotional response from the player. Now this can be any emotional response at all. It could be fear, it could be exhilaration, tension, desperation, comedy. It can be any sort of emotion, but I think a really good level will elicit at least one sort of emotional response from you. And as well, like I think a really great video game level creates memories, and you get that sense of like, wow, when you're playing it, and it's more than just like one or two memorable moments. So for instance, like I often think of, have you played the original Red Dead Redemption?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so the I won't spoil the ending like for people who maybe haven't played it, but the very final, well, not the epilogue mission, but like the very kind of final mission of the game. Right at the end, there's this great like moment. I presume you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it's like such a great. It's one of my favorite kind of moments in gaming. But looking at that level, like I wouldn't rate that level as one of my favorite in gaming, if that makes sense, because I'm like that was just one moment. The rest of it isn't as memorable in my opinion. While a really great level has that completely throughout, you can basically remember the whole mission and you can follow it through on its beats.
Yeah.
So for kind of examples from me, like I look at things like like the very final mission in Mass Effect 2, the suicide mission, where you built up your crew and everything, and you go on this like final like do or die mission to try and save humanity, and like everything that you've built towards like peak, and all the relationships you built with your crew and everything, and you're desperately trying to make decisions to keep them alive, and just so it provokes all these like just emotions in you of like fear and tension and everything, and it's just such a memorable like experience. Also, as well, same for me, like the very first level of Battlefield 1 did that for me in the way it was designed. Like it provoked like I was just in awe really of what it did, and I thought it did a really good job of showing the kind of carnage and like the real like sadness of the First World War and how it did. So moving on to kind of innovation, I think as well that a really good video game level will like innovate and it introduce the player to kind of new mechanics and concepts, or it takes mechanics that's already established and puts a new spin on them, and keeps the game fresh, keeps the gameplay fresh. It can deliver completely fresh gameplay as well. Also, I think a really good level can surprise a player, whether that be through like elements such as the pace, maybe the locale, perhaps the enemies, just different things like that. But it will really give you a surprise and be like, oh, I didn't see this coming, and that's what makes it memorable. Things for me are like the mission in Titanfall 2 called Effect and Cause, which is the one where you get the time travel gadget, and then you're time traveling between like the ruined facility, and then you go back in time to when it was fully working, and you've got different enemies to fight, and it allows you different ways to like platform, but also like so as well if you're in a completely difficult fight, say with the enemies in the kind of past, you can skip forward to the present, maneuver yourself around, go back to the past, and you flank them and everything. And it's a really I think it's a really innovative way as well. Something like the Riddler challenge rooms, Batman Arkham City, just in the way they made you think about like different uses for Batman's gadgets and how you could overcome these challenges. And then finally, with the idea of design, obviously, like there's a need to make a level fun, and a good video game level, I think, is fun to play. But as well, you want to create an interest, I think, in your level, and you like perhaps want to make players explore it. If it's not like too linear a level, you might want to encourage, rather than like a player just going A to B, to finish the level, you might want to encourage them to explore a bit. I think as well, like if it's a really well designed level, it tells a player what to do, but not how to do it. If that makes sense. So it says you need to do this objective to complete the level, but we're not going to tell you must do this to finish it. So you've kind of got scope to devise your own approach to it. I think as well, like a good level empowers the player, and like you have you get some agency, and you not just feel like you're being kind of handhold. You're not being like pushed through it, and people are guiding you and telling you, oh, do this now, do that. I think having really efficient design as well, not being wasteful, and like making a really kind of tight, experience and not having bits where you're like, you're just padding this now, and it's it just feels like it's dragging. And so examples for me are, I think the Sapienza level in the Hitman game from 2016 was just such a well-designed level that really made you want to explore and gave you these objectives, but then you really wanted to devise your own way to achieve it and gave it like a great replayability. Also, the Silent Cartographer level from the original Halo, the one where you land on the island and it's like the beach assault at the beginning. I thought it was just such a well-designed level in terms of its pacing and just the way it kind of pushed you forward and got you these really exciting moments. So those are the three principles that I would say for good video game design. And briefly, just what I think make a bad video game level, I'd say levels that are just kind of uninspired. You can tell there's not really much passion kind of behind it. They kind of feel like going for the numbers. Like if it's a flabby experience, you're like, this is just wasteful. Like, like you're just adding things in and you're just like, oh God, another like fight in a corridor with, another fight in a room with chest high walls. Forcing like kind of one-off mechanics into a game, whether it be like a forced stealth section or a forced vehicle section, that just the game it's not well implemented. Unclear direction as well. Sometimes if you're just not given any clue about what you have to do, it can be quite frustrating. But at the same time, there can be too much hand holding. You can be just like, you're like, I'm not having any chance to really experience this. And then finally, I'd say like an unfair challenge, where it's just like, it's just too difficult. And like, I'm not having any fun trying to get through this. That's the kind of things I would say for a kind of bad video game level design.
No, there are very good points. Kind of just hopping on, and I swear to goodness I'm an optimist, I'm not a pessimist, but jumping on your bad level, criticism, or not criticism, but your points. Yeah, I do see what you mean, like just when you were saying about the repetition there, because I'm thinking of games like, of course, Gears of War. There was a lot of that. Like, I love Gears of War. I think the first two did a good job. But when you play like 3 and 4 and you see like a lot of repetition, that you see the walls kind of rise up and you're like, okay, this is going to be a shootout scene, isn't it? And then
exactly.
They all run out and you're like, oh God, right?
There's no surprise or anything at all.
Yeah, and I suppose it's the same with it's the same with a lot of shooter games, I would say. But especially with games like, and this is going to sound weird, but it's going to sound weird about me talking about a Sonic game. I know, surprise. But I would say personally they're quite a good example of good and bad game design, because if you look at their earlier like 3D games like Sonic Adventure, they definitely tried to make it a lot more open that you could explore. So at the very first level, you're basically on a beach and there's like so many shortcuts and different ways you can get to the end. Like, they're not radically different, you don't have to go off the beaten path to get to them, but the fact that you can still get to that point, it tells a lot that, like even at the very beginning when you're standing there getting ready to run, see if you turn right round, you can get like items and things, and that's just like a small touch. Like, it's not, as I said, it's nothing revolutionary, but it's like a nice touch. It rewards the player for kind of navigating, whereas with like the new games, like let's say Sonic Forces, basically you can either go above or below. That's really it. It's giving me bad flashbacks to the only Rayman game that I've ever played, and it was like an educational version of it, and it was like, if you got the wrong answer you would just die, and that was not a good game at all. Maybe I'll open up about that one day, but that's oh, that was an awful game. But yeah, it's like games that, in fact, do you know what I really don't like? I do like, in terms of like bad level design, see when levels are far too big but offer nothing. Like, the amount of games that I've played where it's a huge level and you are walking for ages and there is just nothing around. Like, I mean, if you look at some part, like, not everything about Skyrim, but if you look at some parts of Skyrim, and I know technically that doesn't fit into the narrative of it being, broken into levels, but it's like there's some areas in that where it's like there's just absolutely nothing. You could be walking for ages and there's just nothing around, and that's, in a way, that's okay for that game, because in other parts of the game, there's like tons, or there's random encounters. But when you have a whole game like that, like the amount of games I've played like that, and I'm just like, where's the, and they talk about, it's a big expansive world and everything, and I don't know, it's just, it cheapens it. I think as well, in terms of bad level design, one of the ones that kind of stands out to me is, do you remember Watch Dogs?
Yeah.
And I hate to bring this up, I'm so sorry. But Watch Dogs has this sub level almost where you have to hunt down a serial killer. I think I brought this up before. So basically you have to hunt down this serial killer. And, it's really interesting because they get you to use all the old mechanics. So you think, okay, I'm going to be using all the old stuff that I've learned, all the old gameplay. But then it just plays out like any random encounter. Where it's like you have to spy on the person, you see who it is, you beat them across the face. That's it. Like, it's done. Genuinely, like, you could... Sorry, spoilers. I mean, that's the thing, though. It's like the missed opportunities. And for whatever reason, like, I'm not saying they should put their A game in, like, a side story. But when you build something up like that, like, if you're building a level up, and then all of a sudden it's just like, yeah, just chuck it out the window. You're like, well, why couldn't I have come in a different direction? Or, is there any way that I could use the environment around me? Or, yeah, I would say that's definitely an example of bad level design. But kind of backtracking and pretending that I'm a positive person and going into, like, good level design. Like, I do think that good level design is definitely all of the above, like what you said. I think you described it perfectly. And as well, I think reward as well. Like, you have to feel as if you're getting rewarded for, like, see if you go off the beaten path. I think that was one of the things that Call of Duty and a lot of other shooters get a lot of flack for. The fact that they're all very linear with their stories. Like, even with the new ones, like, I know there's you can choose option A or B, but at the end of the day, you're still going to get to the same point at the end of it.
Yeah.
It's like, you can technically, like, some of the games did do that. Like, you can get the intel or the Easter eggs and things. It shows, I suppose, that the developers of the game have some kind of, I wouldn't say affection, that's probably too strong a word, but they have some kind of care for the game, that they're putting in these small touches which they really don't need to. Whereas in terms of a bad level design, you could have a massive map and say, oh look, I've got this massive map, we're gonna from point A to B and there's gonna be tons of trees, and it's like, well, if there's nothing in it,
what's the point?
I mean, I think the kind of paradox level that's sticking in my head right now is, Slender, the 8 pages.
Yeah.
Like, that game is perfect for, building, like, a spooky atmosphere. But at the same time, the fact you're walking around that whole forest at, like, a snail's pace.
Yeah.
And there's just, like, no music and things, and it's just... I mean, I haven't even played it, and it brings back bad memories. But, it's that idea of trying to get that balance of giving the player something, I suppose, to remember. Like, not every level has to be, it doesn't have to be like a knockout every time.
Yeah.
I mean, would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, like, I think it's, I don't know, maybe it is possible, but, at the same time, like, you are, when you're making a game, you are like, faced with, like, limited resources to an extent and limited time as well. So sometimes you are just going to have to, like, crank out a couple of levels that maybe aren't, like, aren't absolutely, knock out the parks, as you say. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but you can still make, like, good levels. You don't have to be, like, top 10 levels of all time material, but you can still make good levels.
Because, I mean, if there's not, like, at least one good level in the game, it's definitely going to drag it down. I think that's the worry. That there always has to be that kind of magnum opus of each game. Whether it's the first... In fact, before we go on to, our top 3 choices, I've got a quick question for you. See if a game is going to have a good level, do you think it's important that the good level's at the start of the game, or at the end of the game, or kind of in the middle?
Ooh, that is a good question.
Yeah, because I'm looking at my list just now, and mine's vary. Like, some of them are at the very start of the game, and then some of them are kind of mid.
I'm just mulling the question over in my head. Like, it's funny because looking at my 3 choices, all mine are mid-game levels.
Yeah.
So perhaps I should say mid-game. Do you know what? I'm going to say mid-game. I think mid-game because, like, I think when you're starting a game, I don't necessarily think it's the most important to have, like, your A-game material at the beginning, purely because unless it's an absolute stinker of a level, you're going to probably play more of it. You're going to keep playing the game. And then I think as well, kind of on the same idea, if you're at the end, you're probably going to keep going as well. Like, so like it doesn't levels don't have to be like the most standout, like Magnus Opum ones, because unless they're absolutely terrible, you're going to keep going. Well, I think in the mid game, like I would say probably most people, if they're going to give up on a game, it'll probably be about that kind of halfway point in the middle of it. If it's just dull and it's repetitive and you're like, oh, I'm not having any fun playing this. But like if you put like your standout level in there, you're going to spark people's interest, I think, and people like, oh, that was give it a complete breath of fresh air, and they're going to want to keep going with it. So I'll say mid game.
I feel as if it's like, see, for the very beginning, like the first couple of levels, they don't have to be their A game, but they have to have some kind of hook, at least.
Yeah,
to kind of intrigue the player to kind of go on and, at least interest them to get to the A game. Because, yeah, as I said, other than like one exception, yeah, the other two that I've got are definitely mid game. And I'm like, yeah. So yeah, mid game. Without any further ado, let's just jump into like our top 3 levels. So I will give the floor to you, and yeah.
You sure?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, so I'll jump in. Right, so my first choice, it's a level that I have discussed before. I discussed it way back when we did our episode on horror games, and that is the level. It's a level from Half-Life 2, and it's the level We Don't Go to Ravenholm, which is about mid. I can't remember if it's exactly midway through, but it's about the midpoint of the game. And I think this level is just fantastic on part of on every level. It hits all the 3 principles that I talked about earlier. It creates this really effective sense of like tension, dread, and fear and exhilaration. And sorry, probably before I launch, I should probably explain a bit about the level. So basically, this level takes place in this kind of small mining town. And basically, the plot of Half-Life 2, kind of roughly, is that this alien race has invaded the Earth and like taken control of it. And basically, what happened in this small mining town of Ravenholm was sort of out of the way, and it became this kind of resistance kind of hideout and center for people who were trying to resist the aliens, who are called the Combine in Half-Life 2. And basically, the Combine find out about it. And so what they do is, rather than like attacking the town directly, they launch what are called head crab shells into the town, and basically head crabs. I think it's one of the like probably most memorable enemies from the Half-Life games. Yeah. They're like these like almost spider kind of crab looking creatures that basically jump on, attach to people's heads and turn them into zombies. Basically, so what the Combine did is they made shells filled with these things, and they launched like thousands of them into Ravenholm. So basically, all the population of Ravenholm is wiped out, and basically he was either killed or become zombies. So the town is basically like abandoned and sealed off. At one point in Half-Life 2, you end up having to go through it, and it's this really creepy experience. And everything about the way it's introduced is brilliant as well. So the preceding chapter, you're in this Resistance hideout, and they have a tunnel that leads to Ravenholm, but it's been all blocked up and sealed off. And then one of the characters, you go by it, and one of the characters is like, "Oh, that's the tunnel to Ravenholm." Then they just pause and go, "We don't go there anymore." And it's a really short line, but you're like, oh, it creates this sense of, you get really like, oh, it's kind of exciting. Like, why don't they go there anymore? But also like this kind of dread, like, well, there must be a good reason they don't go there anymore. Yeah. And circumstances mean you have to go there. And you instantly walk in, and creepy music plays, and there's the legs of this corpse just swinging from this tree, and you can just see bodies around and everything. It's proper horror experience. And it's a really memorable environment, because it's this really kind of claustrophobic small town with like narrow lanes and kind of ramshackle buildings and everything, but it's also like, you can see the detritus of the carnage that happened from the attack. And what makes it great as well is it's the first proper level in Half-Life 2 where you get to use the gravity gun, which is the standout kind of weapon of Half-Life 2. And it's basically a weapon that allows you to pick up objects and fire them and fling them at enemies, or like solve puzzles with them. And that was one of the Half-Life 2's big selling points, was its physics engine. And it was the perfect playground to use this weapon. And what's really cool about it as well is they never specifically say to you, oh, you can pick this up and fire that to kill an enemy, but they leave lots of environmental clues around to give you ideas. So in one of the first rooms you go into, you see one of these kind of saw blades like stuck into the wall, and you can see like a zombie's been cut in half with it. And so you're like, I can use that. I can pick this up with a gravity gun, and I can use it to kill any zombies that come my way. It's a very clever design that way. What's great about it as well is it's such a departure from the rest of the game. And this is when I talked about it in the horror game episode. I think I was answering the question. You said, what's like the best horror level in a non-horror game? This was the one I used, because it's such a different experience from the rest of Half-Life 2, where for the most of Half-Life 2, you feel like quite a powerful character, and you feel like you're with a one-man army. But this level really strips that all away, and it presents you with a really kind of different environment and different challenges. And you're fighting zombies and head crabs, but there's lots of different ones. There's ones that are really fast. There's some head crabs that are poisonous and take off like all your health in one bite. So it forces you to think differently. And it makes you feel really vulnerable. And you're in this claustrophobic environment where zombies just start to swarm you, and you really feel quite powerless, which is good. I mean, it has such tight design as well. Like the level design is great because it pushes you forward, and it uses the enemies to keep the tension there and always make you feel uneasy, and you're never sure, like, are you going to turn a corner and what are you going to run into, and you might get trapped in a room and like enemies just swarm you at points. But it always provides a good challenge, but it's never unfair. You never get to a point where you're like, oh, this is just unfair and I'm just getting, I have no hope here. So again, that kind of keeps the tension going because you always have a chance to get through, and you're like, oh, God, I just survived that one. What am I going to see next? And so for me, it just ticks all those boxes of just a great level, and such a memorable one. It was one of the first ones I thought of when we were doing this topic. I was like, I've got to talk about Ravenhood because it's such an amazing level. It's one that's forever like seared in my brain because I just think it's amazing.
When we actually talked about that level in I think it was episode 3 that we did horror games. Yeah, it must have been. It was sometime last year anyway. And I think I said back then that I hadn't played Half-Life 2 like all the way through. Still haven't. It's on my New Year's resolution list. And that seems to be one of the levels that does stick out. It's one of the levels that everyone keeps saying, don't go to Ravenholm and things, and yeah, there is one I'll definitely need to at least record my reaction, I suppose, and then send it to you and be like, oh my God, this is terrifying.
No, I want to be there to watch. I want to watch live.
Oh God.
I want to see your unfiltered experience to it.
I'll be like, this isn't so bad. Oh no.
I don't know, it's one of these things, because Half-Life 2 is obviously an old game now. Like, it's 15 years old now, maybe
something like that,
to be honest. But and I don't know, maybe it's not. Maybe you wouldn't find the same experience going to it. You might find it a bit dated, and perhaps it's just because I happened to play it. I played it when the Orange Box came out, so that was a couple of years after. But maybe now you might find it a bit dated. But I don't know, I think it's just still an amazing level. I think it was 2004 originally. I think Half-Life 2 came out.
I'm just thinking, I feel bad because I'm looking at my first top level that I would have said, and I'm kind of like, my God, that is nothing like Ravenholm.
I'm sure it is as good as
yeah, because my first level is, well, technically it loosely relates to the idea of the military. So have you ever played Sonic Adventure 2?
Oh man, I'm afraid it's that. Oh. Wait, was that the one I played at yours, or did I play Sonic Adventure 1?
No, that was Sonic Adventure 1. No,
I have not played 2 then.
we never actually. So sorry, just for context, before the the whole lockdown thing went down, Adam and I met up, and we were both playing games from each other's. Due to a combination of us obviously being busy. So yeah, we never got into Sonic Adventure 2. How do I explain this one? So basically, the game starts I remember the first Sonic Adventure begins where you are running through the city, you see this creature made of water, you beat the living hell out of it, and then you run across a beach. And I was tempted. I was tempted to choose that level, but the one I ended up going for was one called City Escape. So the way it begins, and this is literally at the start of the game, it begins, you're trapped in this military helicopter. Don't ask, trust me, it's easy enough to ask questions. And then, of course, all of a sudden, out this military helicopter, Sonic the bloody Hedgehog, just jumps out. He takes, this panel off the side of the helicopter, jumps down, and then goes through, not San Francisco, but it's like a city based off of San Francisco. And you, go down, and if there's anyone out there listening who has played this level, you'll know when I'm talking about, see the soundtrack. The soundtrack for it is amazing. It's a band called Crush 40 who does, a lot of music for the Sonic series, and they do one called, City Escape. And it is just such a memorable song, but it's between that and, just that high energy to kick off the game, it's just so well done that it gets you hyped for the rest of the game. And then by the time you get to the end, of the level, oh my God, the end of the level, so you start off in a helicopter, you jump out, you skate down, you defeat all the robots on the way, and then a massive truck starts chasing you. And, like, the truck is so big that it takes up the whole road and it just starts, like, tearing up all of the cars at the side of the road. I don't know, do you remember that scene when I played through it, like, a while ago?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I got to see you do that one. I have to admit, it sounds amazing.
Oh, it was terrifying at the time because it's like you're running thinking, "Yay, I'm Sonic the Hedgehog," and then 2 seconds later, this big goddamn truck like comes out of nowhere, and you're like, "Oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god!" You're running down the street. As all of these people's cars, I always laugh because I like to imagine the people who actually live in those houses next door being like, "Oh, what a beautiful day," and then 2 seconds later they see a blue hedgehog running down the street, and then B, this huge military truck just chasing after it. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna call in sick for work today, you know. But I mean, like, there's not a lot of exploration. There's some bits that you can explore in it. Not the best, but at the same time, I think it's like a really strong start that gets you into the rest of the game, which I think is a good thing because there's a lot of levels that if they swap places, then it would have put me off the game entirely. A lot of the treasure hunting ones, but that's a whole rant in itself. But yeah, no, that would definitely be mine to kick it off. City Escape. From Sonic Adventure 2. Definitely a very strong one that keeps the energy high and kind of sets the tone. It's a goofy game. It's goofy, it's over the top, but you know what? I mean, I had a blast, and, you know...
Fun, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't fun or memorable, obviously I wouldn't be bringing it up now, but, like, I wouldn't be thinking about it years later, going, oh yeah, City Escape.
How do you think it compares to, like, other Sonic levels, just as a matter of interest? Like, does it feel familiar? Or does it feel like something very different?
I mean, what they've started doing, this is a weird thing that I kind of brought up at the beginning, because what they've started doing with Sonic levels is they've got this high, middle, and low path design. So it's like they're also putting an emphasis because, you know, everybody loves Sonic in 2D apparently, which is another rant in itself, but they put a lot more emphasis on that, so they've got like the divergent paths, but it doesn't feel the same as like something like Sonic Adventure. Or even City Escape or things like that, because it's like you're getting from point A to B, but kind of part of the fun of it was trying to find your own way to get to that end point. Yeah. Whereas in the newer ones, it just feels, I don't know, it feels a bit more hollow in a way.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of a shame. I suppose that's just them trying to play it safe. You know, because the weird thing was, I was kind of laughing because I was thinking of Sonic Forces again, where there's some bits where you can explore to get these like collectible rings and things, and see once you get them, it's kind of like, great, what do I get with it? And
is there nothing you can really do with it?
I think you get like a T-shirt or something for your Sonic OC. And that's it. And it's like yay! I spent hours trying to get this, and you know, for a pair of sunglasses, I'm like, yeah, sign me up, coach. I'm ready. I'm ready. So yeah, that is my first game. So I'll hand it back to you. I'll hand it back to you for your second one.
All right. On a very similar note, my next choice is from the original BioShock. A game, I'm sure, much like. I'm trying to see if there's a way that. There's no trucks or anything in it, though. I'm trying to find a link from what you said. It's a city. It takes place in a city. There we go.
Yeah.
Link established. Yeah. So the bit that I've chosen is the Fort Frolic area from BioShock. Again, now this might not fit into the kind of classic, as we were talking about earlier, level, kind of idea of a level. This is more of like a map. But the way the original BioShock is structured is it's these different areas, which themselves are, I think they are levels. You know, they still conform to the idea of a level. So yeah, Fort Frolic is just it's just an unforgettable locale, and it just sticks in the mind, and it's the most memorable bit of the original BioShock, and it's the best bit, in my opinion, and I think quite a lot of other people's opinions as well. Again, it's about middle of the game again. So basically, for the first half of BioShock, from the point that you first arrive in the underwater city of Rapture, and basically BioShock takes place in a city called Rapture, which was designed to be this built by this kind of like enigmatic sort of millionaire who wanted to like free kind of artists and scientists and like other people from kind of government control, and he wanted to build this kind of free, quote unquote, like free society where people like mankind could push itself to the limit, you know, and better itself. And basically it ends up like devolving into civil war, and just tearing itself apart. And when you arrive, it's a city that's just in ruins now. Basically, and its inhabitants are basically all kind of like drugged up, like lunatics who are called splicers. And basically, so for the first half of Bioshock, from the time that you arrive in Rapture, you're basically trying to find the creator of Rapture, who's called Andrew Ryan, and you're being guided by this other figure called Atlas. And as you're getting close, it's not long before you finally meet Andrew Ryan. You enter this area called Fort Frolic, which is only meant to be like a brief stopping point. You know, you travel via kind of underwater bathyspheres, which are like little kind of small miniature submarines. And you arrive in Fort Frolic, and you just need to get to the next one and go. So, but just as you get to that next bathysphere, like it gets locked away, and basically you get introduced to basically the quote unquote ruler of Fort Frolic. And Fort Frolic used to be the kind of entertainment district of Rapture. So it's filled with like casinos, nightclubs, all these kind of like shopping, like all these kind of different shopping shops and everything. The proper like entertainment district. And you kind of meet the quote unquote ruler of it now, who's this man called Sander Cohen, who is this artist who's basically kind of gone mad and like taken control and like designed now Fort Frolic in his own kind of image. And what's really interesting about it is, so for the most of the time that you're traveling for Rapture, you have these two, you have the figure of Atlas and you have the figure of Andrew Ryan, who are constantly talking to you and like trying to sway you and everything. But for Fort Frolic, you don't hear from either of them because it's Sander Cohen just cuts your radio off. So you only hear from him the whole time. And so it makes it a really different experience. It's another level that like makes you constantly feel uneasy and tense because it's really different and it's really creepy in points. And it's again like a lot of Bioshock is quite like more like a horror experience, but there's something about Fort Frolic which just takes it to that extra level. What's really good about the level as well is it has this really innovative relationship with the kind of central villain. So usually all the areas that you go to have like a kind of central villain figure who you eventually have to fight, and they're kind of like classic kind of boss fights. But it's not the case in Fort Frolic. Basically, rather than actually like being in conflict with the main villain, you actually collaborate with him, and so he sets you this task in that he wants you to basically track down. He has these three people who he called his muses and stuff, these artists who he was grooming, but who've like turned against him, and so he wants you to track them down throughout Fort Frolic, kill them, basically take a picture of their corpse, and then display it on this kind of this art collage that he's making. So it's this kind of collaborative relationship, and he kind of helps you out, and it makes it really interesting. It also introduces kind of new enemies that differ from the previous enemies you faced. So for the most part, you're facing these enemies called splicers, and they kind of come in different varieties. There's ones armed with kind of like melee weapons. There's ones with guns. Some of them like climb around on the ceilings and stuff, and others can kind of like do short teleportation. And basically, they all have one thing in common. They're all basically completely mad, and you can hear them like rambling and like raving and yelling and everything. So you usually hear them before you see them. But in Fort Frolic, you get introduced to this very different enemy which are called plaster splicers. And basically, like, Sander Cohen is an artist, so he's fascinated with sculpture. And so as you kind of venture around Fort Frolic, you see lots of like figures like plastered and everything like that, just like displayed in some of them are like in dancing poses. Other ones are in kind of like kind of working poses, just different kind of poses and everything. And eventually, at one point, if you go to a specific location and you activate a specific thing, these enemies will scatter, and then they'll just attack you at random. They'll show up at random points in the level, and they're completely silent. And the only really way that you can hear them is you can hear like they crawl around on the ceiling, and if you listen for like the tiles like falling off and stuff, that's the only way that you can hear them. Otherwise, they'll just attack you, and you have no concept. Or else they'll just show up. Like you'll turn a corner, and one of them will just be displayed in front of you. But it's really interesting that if you don't do the specific thing, so there's like a weapon upgrade station, and if you use that weapon upgrade system, then that's what triggers them to disperse. But if you don't use it, then you'll never encounter them. They'll just be statues. You know, as far as you know, you'll have no reason to ever like interact with them. As well, it has a really innovative gameplay segment, which stands out completely from all the other kind of combat sequences in the original Bioshock. So basically, after you've collected like 2 out of the 3 photographs and put them on the display, Sander Cohen basically goes into this mad rage, and he accuses you of not respecting him, not respecting his work, and he sends enemies to attack you. But what's really interesting is some Tchaikovsky music starts playing, so it's like kind of classical kind of ballet music. And these enemies attack you, but they're really weak. They don't have much health, the enemies, and their attacks don't do that much damage. And it almost plays like a kind of dance sequence is really interesting, and like you can kind of get into it, and you can kind of time your swings of your weapon to go with the beats of the music and make it this kind of proper ballet dance. And it gives you the sense of like, even though you're still like working with Sander Cohn and you're creating this kind of art and this kind of artistic, it's really, really interesting. And it's really innovative. And it's a level that you really want to explore. So the BioShock levels are always quite fairly large, and you can just go point A to point B, but you can also like dive off and go explore different locations and everything, and find kind of collectibles and audio kind of logs and things. And this is a level that really makes you want to do that, to find out more. There's excellent like environmental storytelling, and like the Fort Frolic location tells you a lot about Rapture, about like the world that it used to be and the world it is now. And it tells you a lot about Sander Cohen as well and his character. It was great in that. And it's just such a unique experience within the game. It just stands out from all the other levels. And the original BioShock is a great game, and I absolutely love it. But there's something about Fort Frolic, and I think it's just all these things that I've mentioned that just combine to make it this just really innovative and just fantastic experience. And it's just one that like I'll never forget and absolutely love.
I really need to play BioShock again. I started, got a couple of levels in, but I don't think I ever made it to Fort Frolic. So yeah,
it's good. It's good.
You've reignited my interest in it, I have to say.
No, I'm glad something good came out of this. At least.
Oh, definitely.
Something good came out of my ravings.
So yeah, next week is going to be the BioShock episode, and I'm looking. Yeah. I suppose a different kind of horror, which I'm trying to like loosely link these. So the second the second level that I chose is in itself a bit of a horror game. Well, not a horror game, but it's definitely some kind of horror, because the one I'm talking about is Vendetta from World at War, which is, I mean, the whole game is quite brutal in terms of its depiction of war, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Like, it's... I think it was like the very first like Call of Duty game that properly emphasised that. Like, you always had death and things like that in Call of Duty, it's expected because it's a war game, but yeah, I think that definitely toned up the horror, with people getting chopped and just horrible things happening. But Vendetta is like a very special level in that sense. It begins as I think you're a private or a sergeant in the Russian army. I think it's after the Battle of Stalingrad, isn't it?
It's during the Battle of Stalingrad.
Oh, sorry, during. Yeah, during the Battle of Stalingrad, and you're amongst just basically a pile of your dead comrades, and you start crawling through. You see, the German soldiers like gun, the dead bodies and everything. It looks like absolutely horrific. And then you come across another character who is just so iconic, Viktor Reznov, he's basically like a sergeant or a commander or something, but yeah, he basically guides you and gives you a sniper rifle. Yeah, like guides you through the city, and he has all these kind of really kind of good tidbits of saying like, oh, you should only shoot these people when the bombers are above because that will drown out the sound. Let's move up before they find the body. Things like that. It's a lot more slow, if you know what I mean. It's a lot more... Yeah. It's not like your stereotypical... Because you can imagine if it was like Modern Warfare 2, it would be like someone no-scoping their way into the Stalingrad victory, and it would be like, not historically accurate. But no, like that aside, it's very good the way they pace it. Because it's quite slow. You pick them off one by one, you make your way through the abandoned city, and it is quite haunting. Because, I mean, between the music and going into, like, bars and things that are just obviously completely desolate, but they've still got that faint light coming from them, and it's really good. And then you get to a point where a sniper spots you and tries to hit you. So you have to, like, dive into this building and try and shoot him back. Now, for all those Call of Duty fans, if you've played this, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here, and you'll know as well, Adam, what I'm about to go on to. But basically there's a level where... Or sorry, not a level, but a part of the level where this sniper is trying to hit you. So you have to, like, scan each window to see where he's shooting from. And if you make one wrong mistake, I think it's like one shot, one kill, isn't it?
It's close enough. Like I think on like the medium difficulties, it will take off virtually all your health. I think higher difficulties is what it is, literally a one-shot, one kill.
Yeah, like it took me ages to do it in veteran mode. It was horrible. I did it, but at what cost? But yeah, it's like that kind of cat and mouse game where you're having to hit them, and the amount of frustration that you feel when you actually do hit them, and they're like, "Oh, you only wounded him, you grazed him." You know, you hear that over and over again. You're like, "Oh, for goodness sake, how many bullets can this guy take?" And then he's got decoys and things, and it's just so well done. I think after that, like, it is still good, but I think after that it kind of follows the more traditional. Like, see, once you jump out the building after it explodes,
yeah,
I think that's when it turns into back to a Call of Duty game where you're just fighting, you know, normally, and then you get to the end where you have to shoot the Russian, or not the Russian, sorry, the German captain, or whatever his name is. Yeah, I do think it's just such... It's quite refreshing, especially for a game that always is set to 100 in terms of its narrative, even with... Like, because if you look at Modern Warfare 2, which I think came...
The year after.
Was it the year after? Yeah, I was just trying to think where, again, it's a word I use a lot, but these very bombastic levels, whether it be a stealth mission, whether it be just a regular mission where you're shooting in a corridor, like, there wasn't any subtlety to it. Whereas this, you could feel the atmosphere, you could feel the tension, and even though you were kind of set into one path, it did a good job of kind of masking that. It kind of encourages you to think about it. Like, it doesn't say, oh yeah, just run up and stab them one by one, you know, be a superhero. You're using common sense to be like, right, okay, these bombers are going over, therefore they're not going to hear me shooting them and no-scoping them from all the way over there. Lie, I'm not good enough to no-scope from that distance, but... You know, it's... I just think it's like such a good, like, kind of Hall of Fame moment for the Call of Duty series, and I think it's one that a lot of people come back to when they think of Call of Duty, and they think, it's Vendetta. So yeah, it's definitely one that's lived on, and I do think it definitely deserves to be one of those top levels.
It's such a great tone setter, I think, as well, for like the rest of the Soviet campaign in World at War, because the kind of driving like theme of the Soviet campaign in that game is that it's like a revenge. You know, it's like the Russian army coming to like take its revenge on Germany for all that it's done, done to them, to their people and everything. And you really get that throughout that whole level, you know, because the whole part of the level is that you're trying to assassinate this German general who's like, you know, caused all this chaos, caused all this havoc and death and destruction, and it's just like this great set off for you know, we're gonna get our revenge here, and then, you know, a few years down the line we're gonna go to Germany and like properly enact our revenge. So I think it's an absolute great tone setter for the story of that campaign.
I think what's good about this level is, while if you play it in veteran mode, you get one shot killed by that sniper we were just talking about, but at least it's better than when you're trying to storm the Reichstag and there's like 50 grenades at your feet. Yeah, which is another... Yeah, just quickly, sorry, before I ask you about your third level. Yeah, if you play this game in veteran, be prepared to see a lot of grenade counters, because that's the game's... I would say that's probably... Well, it's more of the AI, I think, than the levels, but yeah, there is a huge problem where if you play it in higher levels, the AI who are shooting at you think, oh yeah, I've got a grenade, I'll just throw it. And then his friend thinks, oh, I'll throw a grenade. And then everybody and their mother throws a grenade, and it's like, great. And then you have to play the mission like 1,000 times. So we're going to move on to your third one before I start ranting about that.
We both see red.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, what is your third... level that you chose?
So, well, we have an actual proper link here for the first time, because I'm also picking one from the Call of Duty series. Nice. And I'm going the game before World at War. I'm going to Call of Duty 4 and Modern Warfare, and I'm picking the level All Ghillied Up.
That's a good one.
Yeah, which I think still tops like polls of the greatest Call of Duty level of all time. Rightfully so, I'd argue. And again, it's another really memorable location. So basically, this mission is a flashback mission in Call of Duty 4, and it takes place in Chernobyl, which is the Soviet nuclear reactor that had a meltdown and basically released all this like radiation into the area and basically made Chernobyl a dead city, basically. And so it takes place there, and you're part of an SAS team who's sent to assassinate this kind of this Russian ultra-nationalist leader who I think is trying to like buy weapons, if I recall rightly, and has been deemed like a real danger. So you're sent to as part of this two-man team to assassinate him, and you're playing as like a young Captain Price, who's one of like probably one of the most famous characters in the kind of Call of Duty series. And yeah, like the Chernobyl makes you such an evocative and such a memorable location as you're like sneaking through, and the level is all designed around like you being stealthy, and you're there to like, so you're dressed up in what was called these ghillie suits, which are like these big camouflage suits that have kind of designed to blend into foliage, and you and like your squad mate, you're crawling through and you're trying to sneak through to get yourself into position. It has some, as a level, it has some incredible moments of tension and just exhilaration and foreboding, because there's some moments that are just like, still I think about them, I get all tense thinking about them. There's one bit where you're kind of crawling across this field, and then all of a sudden this like patrol, this like Russian ultranationalist patrol appears, and they're walking towards you, and there's armored vehicles and there's lots of guys, and you have to just like stay still and try and maneuver yourself so you're not going to be directly in the path of one of like the walking soldiers, because if they find you, there's like no way you can get out, you're going to die. And it makes for a really tense moment. And there's another bit where you need to like dash through this kind of convoy and crawl under trucks, and it's just so well done for these moments. It was a real shake up from what was the usual kind of first person shooter fare, and it's something that's so different, I think, from like anything that had really come before it, because it really forced you to rethink how you approach a situation, like compared to normally how you would. So normally in FPS, you know, you're confronted with bad guys, you're like, well, I've got a gun. Yeah. I can solve the situation quite easily here with me and Mr. Gun. But this one like really forces you to think, and you know, you get a choice a lot of the times. You get a choice. Your squad mate gives you the choice and says, you know, you can take these guys out or you can let them go past, and it's really your call. And so you really get a lot of choice about how you want to approach it. And so although it's like quite a linear level, it is an environment that you kind of want to explore a bit of it. I would love to like be able to explore more of it, because it looks so fascinating. Just the way they've done it is so like amazing, and it really defies the kind of normal FPS conventions of intense action, especially at the end of the level. Usually, I would say it's kind of a usual kind of convention of like a first-person shooter level. Like as you get towards the end, usually that's where the action really kind of ramps up, you know, and that's where you're like fighting more enemies and getting in really kind of like intense situations. But this one actually, like, so basically towards the end of it, you actually get into like the kind of city itself, and there's hardly any. I don't think you actually come across any enemies. You come across some like wild dogs who, you know, like who can provoke a challenge, but you're really just exploring this basically dead city, and like these abandoned apartment blocks and this like abandoned swimming pool. I think maybe I think it was a school or like a kind of like an office building or something like that. But you're going through, and it's really evocative, you know. And at one point, your squad mates like, you know, 50,000 people used to live here, and now it's this ghost town, and you really get that. And there's like they kind of have like haunting like kind of children's voices, like, you know, you can hear like children playing and stuff in there, and it makes it really like a really interesting like experience, and something that you wouldn't expect to find in especially a Call of Duty game. And it really lets you kind of soak in the atmosphere. Again, as I was saying before, it allows for a really good deal of kind of player agency, in that you have the choice of taking guys out or going past them, but it's one that makes you deal with the consequences. So like sometimes you might decide, I want to take out this group of enemies, but then you come to the next group of enemies, you're like, oh, I'm going to let these guys go past. However, a lot of the time, the guys who let go past can discover the dead bodies, and then that raises the alarm and forces you into like, you know, a combat situation that you weren't prepared for at all. So it's one that you really have to think about and put consequences as well. There's like at one point there's a helicopter that circles above, and you go into a building, and there's like a crate of Stinger missiles, which are like anti-aircraft missiles, just lying there. And the game doesn't tell you like, oh, use a Stinger to destroy the helicopter. They're just lying there, and it's completely up to you. You can just try and hide out from the helicopter, or if you want, you can try and take it down. But again, you got to weigh up the consequences. Going back to the idea of like efficient design that I talked about, I think this is the perfect example of it. Like, there's no kind of wasted motion in this level. There's nothing that makes you be like, oh, this is just drawing it out and padding it out. Everything in there is just perfect. Like, it kind of revolves around these couple of kind of set pieces, these nail-biting set pieces I talked about, and then these kind of bits in between where you're kind of creeping through and you're going to choose. You're like, oh, do I want to take people out? Do I want to sneak by? And really, I think it was a revolutionary level. And I think it was a revolutionary level in what was a revolutionary game. Certainly for the Call of Duty franchise, and I think for like the shooter franchise in general, for what it did. And it's one that I don't think the series has ever been quite able to emulate again. No. They've never been quite able to like get the same feel and the same impact to that level. And as I said, the fact that it's still regarded as like the greatest level in the COD series, I think speaks volumes to it. And it's one that I always look back on really fondly. And again, another one that when we did this topic, one that instantly came to my mind. It's like, got to talk about old Ghillied Up.
Because I think the closest it came to was Vendetta, probably, because I think
probably.
Vendetta came after, or sorry, World at War came after Modern Warfare 4. It's like, again, that's another kind of example of a sniper level that, again, like, it allows you to take your time. But one of the things, actually, I was just thinking when you were talking about that, about player agency and things, is they're like really well done invisible barriers. Like, because if you play through, a Call of Duty game either nowadays or a lot of FPS games as well, I'm not just singling out Call of Duty, but there are a lot of FPS games where they'll say, oh, go to point B, from A, but then you decide, oh, what if I want to loop around, and there's like a huge like invisible barrier, and it's like, oh, great. Whereas obviously because of what happened in Chernobyl, there's like radiation pockets, so they're all like fenced off and all ghillied up. So it's like you can't go past that point, otherwise you are going to die. Or if you go another way, then it's filled with enemies. So it's like, right, you have to like go on this path. And it's similar in the Vendetta level, where it's like you've got the German soldiers all around you. So it's like you're having to sneak and go through like a certain way, but there's a reason for it. Like, you're not just like running out in the streets, because there probably would be a sniper, just chilling up there, so it makes sense. But yeah, I do agree, like, it's something that they definitely lost after that point, where everybody just decided to pop out the ground and be like, hey guys, and didn't build as, I mean, not that they're not good games, but yeah, that is...
They went down a different route.
And yeah, speaking of different route, so... So, kind of linking to that idea of an atmospheric level, so I was talking to you off stream about this, my third level is one I feel as if, I wouldn't say it was like the most memorable one that people think immediately when they think, oh, top video game levels, but it's one that I've actually been really wanting to talk about for a while. So, the one I'm going to choose is Cortana from Halo 3.
Oh, swerve!
Yeah, no, I'm just joking.
Well played, sir. Well played.
Did you think I was serious for a second?
You know what? I knew you weren't serious, but I couldn't help. A part of me was like, "Oh my god, he's done it! He's actually done it!"
I did have a speech prepared to be like, "Yes, Cortana is it's a reflection of society as a whole and how miserable that." I'm like, no, it's a terrible level.
I'm gonna leave the call.
So yeah.
I don't know Cortana.
So yeah, thank you for coming to Satsunami. If you want to follow me, no, I'm joking. So yeah, no. On a serious note, the level I've chose is one called, I don't even think it does have a name, but it's the wedding level in a game called Sleeping Dogs. Now, Sleeping Dogs is a game I absolutely adore. If for you guys listening there who maybe haven't heard of this game, it's basically like, and I don't want to kind of cheapen it, but it's basically like GTA but set in Hong Kong. It's just such a good game. It's like, I honestly cannot praise this game enough. I feel as if in the game, like, the hand-to-hand combat's like a lot better than the gunplay, whereas it's like vice versa for GTA and everything. But one of the levels, so basically you play a undercover agent called I think it's Wei, and he comes back from America and he infiltrates the triads, and he's working his way up basically to arrest the big bad who's like the head of all of it, to bring him down. And there's one scene now. Yeah, there's going to be kind of spoilers here, so tread with caution. But yeah, there's a scene that basically feels as if it is out like a Hong Kong action film. It honestly feels like one of those that something bad is going to happen, but you can't help but think, no, surely. So basically, halfway through the game, you're getting really chummy with your, like, I don't want to say regional manager for the triads, but it pretty much is, isn't it?
It is your regional manager.
Your regional manager for the triads, as it were, who, you get really chummy with him and he starts to warm up to you and vice versa. And he invites you to his wedding. So, of course, because it's the triads, it's that, like, this big fancy do, you've got all the people, all the guests coming in. It's in this absolutely massive, beautiful house. And, of course, it's that 3 days from retirement moment. where the groom's just like, oh, can you go to my car and bring out beers or something like that? I think it's like drinks that you have to buy.
Wine.
Or yeah, wine or something, because he's like, oh, the big boss, like his manager, has come to, give his blessing. So it's like, yeah, no problem. So you go to the car, and then as soon as you get the wine, 2 seconds later, all you hear is this screaming. And as soon as you hear that, you kind of think, oh no, oh no, 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 it's a wedding, damn it. And you're running back, and you basically have to fight off the catering staff who, and it's not just a case of the catering staff weren't paid or anything, by the way. It's more a case of they were just undercover. I think it's like a rival triad, isn't it? Or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's something like that.
Yeah, that's just infiltrated the wedding, and they just like shoot up the place. Certain characters die, It's just quite tragic. There are a lot of bits where it's like there's the gunplay as well, where it's like you can like leap over, the chest high walls like John Woo style and slow down time and shoot people, which is cool. But at the same time, it just, I don't know, it left a bit of an impact on me, because it's a great game. Like, I would highly recommend if you haven't played it, but just that level in general, it's one that kind of sticks with you because it solidifies itself as like the turning point of the game, and it kind of shows like you can take like you can take the level in any direction you want, to flank them or just to run up and punch them in the face, which is always satisfying in that game, can I just say.
Yeah.
But it's just such a, it is gutting as well, because they build up, as I said, this relationship between you and this triad guy, and yeah, it's just when they take that away from you, it is that kind of thing where, I think it was something you were saying when we were talking about what makes a level getting bad, where it elicited like an emotional response from me. Like, see if it was just like, oh no, you killed Jim. I like Jim, just as just as NPC lying on the ground. Like, I wouldn't have felt anything, obviously, but because, this is a guy that you've spent half the game with, and now that he's met like a really bloody tragic end, you're like, oh, okay, this is unfortunate. Like you feel angry. Granted, you start to get a bit careless because all you want to do is just, take these guys out and be like, you know what, you're going down. But I think that is where they kind of struck gold. Because it's like, not only do they take advantage of their locale and, the fact that, I don't know whether it was intentional or not, to kind of, refer back to those, like, Hong Kong action films where, you've got the big wedding or something.
Yeah.
And then tragedy strikes. I mean, it's like going back to what we were talking about last time with License to Kill, where again, it's like a beautiful big wedding, and it's like...
Always weddings, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like, what's the worst that could happen? And then the bad guys find them, and you're like...
Oh, no.
But yeah, that would be mine. Definitely capitalises both on the story, on the design of the place as well. And yeah, overall a great level and a great game as well. If you haven't played it, like that is a game that definitely one day I'm gonna fanboy over, because I know you've got Medal of Honor. Yeah. To kind of like, before we finish off, are there any honourable mentions or any kind of closing thoughts from yourself?
Yeah, I mean, for like honorable mentions, like I think I mentioned a couple at the beginning, like I would say ones that nearly made the cut but didn't quite for me. So that first level of Battlefield 1, I think is great, and it was great as well as that, like, when you first put in Battlefield 1 disc, like before you don't get to a main menu or anything, it puts you straight into this mission. Have you played it? You played a bit of Battlefield 1, don't you?
I don't think so. No.
I'll describe. Oh, fair enough. Anyway, but like. So basically, like, the mission takes place, and you're playing as this, like, you're basically playing as this American infantry division, who's like caught in the middle of this German counterattack during the kind of closing year of the First World War. And it's such an innovative way of like doing a first-person shooter. So basically, rather than playing as like one set character, what will happen is you start in like you get different kind of set pieces throughout the level where you'll play as a character, but that character will die. At the end of the, like, they always die, and basically what happens is then like the camera lifts up and you get the person's name, and you get like how old they were.
Yeah,
when they died. It's really evocative and it's really effective for for kind of showing just like the carnage and like the real suffering of war, like the First World War in this case, but any kind of war. And I remember I played it with a couple of, I think actually I might have, when I first played, I think S Banks was there, and somebody else as well. And we were just there, and like it was like really like quiet points, because you're like, God, like, you know, it's not the kind of way that when you usually play a first person kind of shooter, and you're really into like the kind of like action of it and everything.
Yeah.
Like, damn, you know, it's like as you're like playing it, and you see like you've been playing as this 18-year-old who's just died, and it's such an it was such an evocative way of doing it. And the rest of the campaign couldn't quite get back to that level. But like for me, I still think about it, I'm just like, it was such an innovative way of doing it. So that was one that very nearly made the cut for me.
No, it's just, see, when you were describing it there, like, yeah, it came flooding back there, because I was like, what? Because you're exactly right. Like when it comes to the rest of the game, it's kind of like, but yeah, that is, it's again another example of like them kind of showing their hand at the beginning of the game, rather than the end.
Yeah, but really, like a really effective way to kind of hook you into it and like kind of put you into the way of it. And I think if like one more I would honorably mention is one of the kind of side missions in Skyrim, which is the quest A Night to Remember, which basically starts with when you enter like a tavern at kind of at some random point in the game, you can meet somebody there who challenges you to a drinking competition, and basically so you end up drinking with this guy, and then basically the screen blacks out, and then like time will pass, and you wake up the next day, you wake up in this temple which you find out you've trashed because you've been so drunk, and that kind of starts off this quest of you like having to deal with your actions to then find out more information. You trade, and you find out that you stole a farmer's like prized like ram and gave it to a giant. You got married to like one of these like hag raven, which is like a kind of like a witch crossed with a bird, like which is, you got married to this character. It was a really fun. I remember laughing so much at it because it's something very different from the usual kind of fare of Skyrim, as you kind of like a kind of hangover thing as you trace your actions. Like, God, what the hell did I get up to? And you eventually find out that the character you had the drinking competition was one of these Daedric princes. Called Sanguine, who's like he's like the prince of like debauchery and things like that. So like he's set you on this path. But that one really stood out to me. It's just been something so different and so funny. So those were two that nearly made the cut, but didn't quite.
One of the ones that I was just thinking there, I think it was one we were talking about as well, like a couple of days ago. Was it 3-leaf clover?
Oh, 3-leaf clover, of course, yeah.
So I was also saying that I had a funny story for this one, but I don't think I told you. So. Yeah, just very briefly, I remember at university I downloaded the game. I don't know what possessed me to buy it, but I was just like, oh, okay. So I bought it for the PC, and for the most part, like I used to have one of these, pretty much like if you have a laptop kind of combined with a jet. Like, it worked fine as a laptop, but see, as soon as you play games on it, it just overheat. Like, you think that, a PlayStation is noisy. Oh, just this. But I always remember I played GTA on it, like GTA 4, relatively well. I mean, it wasn't the best, but it played alright, which I thought, this is great. I can finally play, Grand Theft Auto at university. Take that, Mum and Dad. It's like... and then I got to 3-leaf clover, and everyone said, oh, this is an amazing mission. For my experience, the textures didn't pop in.
Oh, no.
So I was like, I absolutely had no idea what was supposed to be doing. So it's like, I saw the NPCs, I saw kind of rough outlines of things, and they're like, get down to the basement, and you're running down to the basement, but I'm looking up and I still see everybody there, and I'm like, oh, this is, what kind of spectral hell am I standing in? No. So the whole game just glitched, and then I was like mashing the button until like I got whatever you get at the bottom. I don't know if it's money or something, or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's like the vault, it's like a bank.
Yeah,
It's the vault. Yeah.
But it's like, I just kept running until I ran into something, and then I grabbed it, but I was just running in thin air, and I was like, oh god, this game has completely... It just completely glitched. So yeah, I could see everything, and then I was running up, and once we left the bank it was fine, but yeah, like everything in between, it was just like, yeah, this is
man, that's a real shame.
Yeah, I mean, like for the rest of the level, it didn't really spoil it, but I do need to go back to it and kind of replay it. I think. Yeah,
that's another one that actually I forgot to say. That's another one that nearly made the list. I love Really Clever.
Oh, there's so many, like, see, even in like 4 or 5, or I mean, even San Andreas and things. There's so many levels in them that just could easily make the cut. But
it's true.
Yeah, and we could go on for ages. Don't make us, we will. Yeah, so this Saturday we're doing a 12-hour stream. No, I'm kidding. Let's game over this. I had no idea how to end this, so I was just like, yeah,
Level
let's just
complete.
game level complete. Yeah, see, see, that is. Yeah.
I like how in your mind we failed.
Yeah.
In
No,
my
it's a
mind, I'm
good
like, we
game.
completed it. You're like, we failed.
It's like game over. Yeah, let's wrap this up, guys. Jeez, I
Game
failed.
over, man. Game over.
I failed as a streamer and a host. Oh God. So yeah, first of all, as always, Adam, thank you so much for joining me in today's episode. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, always a pleasure to have you on. And yeah, if you want to see more of this kind of content, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and of course Twitch under the name Satsunami42. If you want to see any of our old podcast episodes, you can catch us on Anchor, Spotify, and of course all good podcast distributors. Without any further ado, stay safe, stay awesome, and most importantly, stay hydrated. Bye guys.
Bye.